But the Falcon Wing doors hadn't even finished their signature upward sweep before a finger thrust into his face, close enough that Johnny Bowen could smell the coffee on Mark Mercer's breath. "Don't you move, thief." The words hung in the pristine air of Briarwood Estates like smoke from a gun that had already been fired. Around them, the manicured lawns of the cul-de-sac stretched in geometric perfection. Modern farmhouses with sharp black trim and designer stone facades stood as monuments to suburban aspiration. Everything here was curated. Everything here was controlled. Everything except this moment. Johnny didn't move, not because Mark Mercer commanded it, but because sudden movements had consequences for men who looked like him, even in bespoke gray suits, even with Italian leather briefcases, even in neighborhoods they'd just paid cash to live in. The Tesla's doors hung open like mechanical wings, frozen mid-flight. Johnny's hand remained on the handle, his posture perfect, his expression carefully neutral. He'd worn this mask before, in courtrooms, in boardrooms, in 1,000 moments where his composure was both shield and weapon. Mark stepped closer, invading the space between car and man, between assumption and reality. His blue polo shirt stretched across his chest as he puffed himself up, performing dominance for an audience that was already gathering. Rick from 3 houses down, Antoinette from across the street, cell phones emerging from pockets like weapons being drawn. "I said don't move." Mark's voice climbed an octave, fueled by something Johnny recognized immediately. The desperate need to be right, to be the hero, to be validated by the sirens that were already wailing in the distance. Because Mark had already made the call, already told dispatch there was a suspicious individual with a stolen luxury vehicle, already set in motion a chain of events that would cost him everything he thought made him untouchable. Johnny finally spoke, his voice low and measured, each word precisely placed. "This is my home." For words. Simple. True. Insufficient. Mark's face flushed crimson. "Bullshit. I know everyone on this street, and you sure as hell don't." "Mark." Johnny's interruption was surgical. "You're standing in my driveway." The briefcase in Johnny's hand contained documents for the biggest audit of his career, a corporate investigation worth billions, scheduled to begin Monday morning at 9 a.m. sharp. Inside that case were NDAs, financial statements, and the names of executives whose careers hung by threads they didn't even know were fraying. One of those names was Mark Mercer. But Mark didn't know that yet. Mark only knew that his neighborhood, was being infiltrated, that the natural order of things was being disrupted by someone who didn't fit the profile, didn't match the aesthetic, didn't belong in a zip code where the media home value had just crossed 3 million. Rick and Antoinette formed a loose semicircle around the Tesla, creating a human barrier between Johnny and his own front door. They didn't speak, but their presence spoke volumes. They were witnesses, validators, the chorus to Mark's solo performance of suburban vigilance. The sirens grew louder. Johnny checked his watch, a subtle gesture that sent Mark into a fresh spiral of indignation. "Oh, you got time to check your Rolex? Where'd you steal that from?" "It's a Patek Philippe," Johnny corrected quietly, though he knew the brand name meant nothing here, in this moment, to these people. What mattered wasn't the watch's value or its provenance. What mattered was that he was standing while Mark told him to kneel. What mattered was that he was calm while Mark needed him to be afraid. The first police cruiser turned onto Briarwood Lane with lights painting the afternoon in strobing blue and red. A second cruiser followed. The suburban silence, that carefully maintained quiet of wealth and distance, shattered under the weight of what Mark Mercer had summoned. Johnny set the briefcase down slowly on the Tesla's white hood, his movements deliberate and visible. He spread his hands at his sides, palms forward, the performance of compliance, the choreography of survival. Mark was smiling now, triumphant, certain of vindication. He had no idea that vindication was about to wear a sergeant's uniform and arrive with an expression of horror instead of relief. Hello, amazing people. Welcome back to Echoverse, the home where forgotten voices finds their echo. Before we dive deeper into today's incredible story, kindly hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't already and comment below where you're watching from. Your support means to us, and it helps us bring you even more exciting stories. Now let's begin. Mark Mercer had found his stage, and he wasn't about to waste it. Rick, Antoinette. His voice carried across the cul-de-sac with the authority of a man who chaired exactly 3 homeowners association meetings and considered it a political career. Get over here. Now. Rick emerged from his garage 3 houses down, wiping his hands on a rag that might have once been white. He was shorter than Mark, softer around the middle, the kind of man who said yes before he understood the question. Behind him, his teenage son held a phone, already recording. Antoinette crossed the street with purpose, her yoga outfit pristine despite the hour, her blonde ponytail swinging like a pendulum of judgment. She'd moved to Briarwood Estates after her second divorce, drawn by the promise of the right kind of people and property values that only went up. They converged on Johnny's driveway like planets pulled into Mark's orbit. Block the car, Mark instructed, positioning them with the confidence of a man directing traffic at a crime scene he'd invented. He's not going anywhere until this gets sorted out. Rick moved to the passenger side of the Tesla, his bulk sufficient to prevent the falcon wing door from closing. Antoinette stood near the hood, arms crossed, her expression a practiced mixture of concern and superiority. Together with Mark at the driver's side, they formed a human barricade around a $120,000 vehicle parked in a driveway connected to a home that Johnny had purchased outright 37 days ago. Johnny remained still, his briefcase now resting on the Tesla's hood, his hands visible, his breathing controlled. He'd been in worse situations, courtrooms where judges had already made up their minds, depositions where opposing counsel tried to provoke him into anger that would play badly on camera. But those were professional battlefields with rules, referees, and consequences for misconduct. This was different. This was 3 people who believed their zip code gave them jurisdiction over his existence. I know the chief personally, Mark announced, loud enough for the gathering neighbors to hear. Mrs. Chun from the corner house. The Hendersons with their matching artists. A young couple Johnny hadn't met yet, standing on their front porch with matching expressions of discomfort and curiosity. Called him on my personal cell. He's sending his best guys. It was a lie, and not even a good one. Mark had called 911 like everyone else, and the dispatcher had sent whoever was available on a Friday afternoon in a suburb where the biggest emergency usually involved a raccoon in someone's pool house. But the lie served its purpose. It announced to everyone watching that Mark Mercer had power, had connections, had the right to determine who belonged in Briarwood Estates and who didn't. The lie transformed a racist assumption into a civic duty. It made him the gatekeeper instead of the aggressor. I've seen this before, Mark continued, playing to his audience. They scope out neighborhoods like ours. High-end cars and driveways. Garage doors left open. They think we're easy targets. He gestured at Johnny without looking at him directly, as if eye contact might undermine the narrative he was constructing, probably casing the whole street. Antoinette nodded gravely. Rick shifted his weight, blocking the door more deliberately now, committed to the role he'd been assigned. The sirens were close now, maybe 2 blocks away. They're wailing a countdown to a confrontation that Mark Mercer expected to win, and Johnny Bowen knew it end very differently than anyone standing in this driveway could imagine. Johnny didn't move, didn't speak, didn't give Mark Mercer the satisfaction of fear or anger or even acknowledgement. He became something else entirely in that moment, a statue carved from patience and precision, standing beside his Tesla, as if he'd been there for centuries and would remain for centuries more. The visual was striking. His gray suit against the white vehicle created a study in contrast, so sharp it looked like a magazine spread on success. The wool caught the afternoon light, appearing almost luminous. His tie hung in a perfect Windsor knot. His Italian leather shoes reflected the manicured lawn beneath them. Every thread, every seam, every detail of his appearance spoke a language that Mark Mercer refused to understand. Johnny's posture was architectural. Shoulders back, spine straight, chin level. His hands rested loosely at his sides where everyone could see them. Open palms, no threat, no sudden movements. It was a stance he perfected over 15 years of professional combat in courtrooms and boardrooms, where body language could win or lose millions before a single word was spoken. Mark circled him like a shark testing prey, looking for weakness, for cracks in facade, for anything that would justify the narrative he'd already constructed. He found nothing. "You're not going to say anything?" Mark demanded, his voice climbing toward hysteria. "Not going to explain yourself? Not to tell us where you got that car?" Johnny's eyes flickered downward. 3:47. He had a conference call at 5 with the Apex Logistics Board of Directors. The gesture was minimal, a slight rotation of his wrist, a glance that lasted perhaps 2 seconds. It was gasoline on Mark's fire. "Oh!" Mark's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Oh, you got somewhere to be? You checking the time? You got another neighborhood to hit after this one." He turned to Rick and Antoinette, to the growing audience of neighbors. "Look at this guy, standing here like he owns the place, checking his watch like we're wasting his time." Johnny said nothing. His breathing remained controlled, measured, the kind of calm that medical professionals achieve during emergencies. In through the nose, out through the mouth, heart rate steady despite the adrenaline his body wanted to produce. Silence was his weapon now. Every word Mark screamed was being recorded by at least 3 phones he could see. Every assumption was documentation. Every accusation was evidence that would play very differently when context arrived. The gray suit didn't wrinkle despite his stillness. The white Tesla behind him looked pristine, its falcon-winged doors still raised like frozen wings of some mechanical angel. The contrast between Johnny's composure and Mark's escalating rage was so pronounced that several neighbors had started whispering, their certainty beginning to crack. Mark moved closer, invading the careful space Johnny had maintained. "Say something. Defend yourself. Tell us who you really are." Johnny checked his watch again. This time it was deliberate, calculated. He lifted his wrist with theatrical slowness, tilted it so the Patek Philippe caught the sunlight, and held it there for 3 full seconds while Mark's face transitioned from red to purple. "That's it." Mark screamed. That's exactly the kind of arrogance. The first police cruiser turned onto Briarwood Lane, and Johnny Bowen finally moved. He placed his briefcase carefully on the Tesla's hood and raised both hands to shoulder height, palms forward, fingers spread. The statue had become a man preparing for survival. The first cruiser took the turn into Briarwood Lane too fast, tires squealing against pristine asphalt that had been repaved just last summer. Blue and red lights strobed across million-dollar facades, transforming the carefully curated aesthetic of suburban perfection into something that looked like a crime scene from a television drama. The second cruiser followed 3 seconds later, both vehicles positioning themselves to block any potential escape route from Johnny's driveway. As if a man in a $4,000 suit was going to make a run for it across manicured lawns in Italian leather shoes. Officer Lisa Wagner emerged from the first cruiser before it had fully stopped, her hand already resting on her service weapon. She was 26 years old, 11 months out of the academy, still operating on textbook protocols and the kind of hypervigilance that came from knowing every move she made was being evaluated by superiors who'd made it clear that rookies didn't get second chances. She saw Mark Mercer first, middle-aged white man in a blue polo shirt, face red, gesturing frantically, clearly distressed. Victim, her training suggested. Concerned citizen. The person who called this in. Then she saw Johnny Bowen, black man in business attire, standing motionless beside an expensive vehicle, hands raised but posture somehow still commanding. The visual didn't match any scenario from her training modules. Didn't fit neatly into the categories she'd been taught to recognize and respond to. Her brain made a calculation in the split second it took to process the scene. Screaming white man plus silent black man equaled threat assessment. Her hand tightened on her weapon. "Sir." Wagner's voice carried the sharp authority of someone compensating for inexperience with volume. "Step away from the vehicle. Hands where I can see them." Johnny's hands were already visible, raised to shoulder height, palms forward. But he complied anyway, taking 2 careful steps sideways, away from the Tesla, his movements deliberately slow and clear. "That's him." Mark rushed toward Wagner, his voice pitched with vindication and relief. "That's the guy. He pulled up in that stolen Tesla about 15 minutes ago. Wouldn't answer questions. Wouldn't identify himself. Just stood there acting like he owned the place." Wagner's partner, Officer James Chun, had exited the second cruiser with considerably less urgency. He was older, maybe 45, with the measured pace of someone who'd responded to enough suspicious person calls in neighborhoods like this to recognize the pattern. His hand wasn't on his weapon. His expression was already transitioning from alert to weary. But Wagner was in charge of the scene, and she was running it by the book. "Sir, I need you to place your hands on the hood of the vehicle," she commanded, moving closer to Johnny, her right hand still hovering near her holster. "Slowly. Keep your movements visible." Johnny complied. His palms made contact with the white hood of the Tesla, still warm from the afternoon sun. The briefcase he'd placed there earlier was moved aside by Wagner's partner, who was already running the vehicle's plates on his radio. "He's been casing the neighborhood," Mark continued, unable to contain himself, playing to an audience that now included half the cul-de-sac. More neighbors had emerged from their homes, drawn by the lights and sirens. Cell phones were everywhere, recording from doorways and driveways and second-floor windows. Probably hit 3 or 4 houses already. "Check that briefcase. I bet it's full of—" "Sir," Step back, Chin interrupted, his tone firm but not aggressive. Let's handle this. Wagner moved behind Johnny, her training taking over. Do you have any weapons on you? Anything that could hurt me? Needles, knives, anything sharp? No, officer, Johnny said quietly, his first word since the police arrived. His voice was calm, professional, carefully modulated to convey compliance without submission. My driver's license is in my right jacket pocket. My vehicle registration is in the glove compartment. The keys are still in the ignition. I didn't ask about your license, Wagner snapped, her adrenaline overriding the reasonableness of his response. I asked of your weapons. No weapons, Johnny repeated, his cheek pressed against the Tesla's hood now, the gray wool of his suit sleeve contrasting starkly against the white paint. Mark was practically vibrating with excitement. Check the VIN. Check the registration. I'm telling you, that car is stolen. Nobody in this neighborhood has ever seen him before. He doesn't belong here. Chin finished running the plates. His radio crackled with a response that made him pause, tilt his head, key the mic again to confirm what he'd just heard. His expression shifted from weary to confused to something approaching concern. Wagner, he called out, his voice careful. We might want to... The sound of a third vehicle turning onto Briarwood Lane cut him off. Not a cruiser this time. An unmarked SUV with a distinctive antenna array that marked it as a supervisor's vehicle. Sergeant Peter Perkins had arrived, and the temperature of the entire situation was about to change dramatically. Wagner's confidence grew with every second of Johnny's compliance. This was textbook. This was clean. Suspect cooperating, backup present, witness corroboration from multiple neighbors. She'd write this up as a model response to a theft-in-progress call. Spread your feet, she commanded, her voice carrying across the cul-de-sac. Wider. I need to pat you down for weapons. Johnny adjusted his stance, his expensive shoes sliding further apart on the driveway's smooth concrete. His hands remained flat against the Tesla's hood, his breathing controlled despite the humiliation of the position. He could feel every neighbor's eyes on him, every phone camera recording this moment that would define him in their minds forever, not as their neighbor, not as a successful attorney, but as a suspect, a criminal, a threat that had been neutralized. This is what happens. Mark's voice rang out, triumphant and ugly. This is what happens when you think you can just roll into our neighborhood and... Sir, I need you to step back, Chin repeated more firmly this time. He positioned himself between Mark and the scene, creating a physical barrier that Mark seemed not to notice in his excitement. Wagner's hands moved over Johnny's suit jacket, professional but thorough. She found his wallet, extracted it, flipped it open. Driver's license. Credit cards. A business card that she glanced at but didn't process, too focused on completing the pat-down protocol. Check the VIN, Mark shouted, ignoring Chen's warning. That car is stolen. I'm telling you, check the VIN against the registration. He probably has fake documents. Wagner moved to the vehicle identification number visible through the windshield, pulling out her notepad to copy down the 17-digit sequence. Her partner was still on the radio, and something about his body language had shifted. Shoulders tense, head tilted in a way that suggested the conversation wasn't going as expected. Get his ID, Mark continued, practically bouncing on his heels. Run his name. I bet he's got warrants. I'd bet. Mr. Mercer, If you don't step back right now, I'm going to ask you to wait in your home, Chin said, his patience finally exhausted. There was something about this whole scene that felt wrong to him. The man against the Tesla was too calm, too composed. His suit was too expensive, his shoes too pristine, his entire demeanor too practiced for this to be what Mark Mercer was claiming it was. But Wagner was the primary, and she was committed to her assessment. Johnny remained motionless against the hood, his cheek pressed against the white paint, his gray suit sleeve a stark contrast against the vehicle's finish. He maintained eye contact with the neighbors watching from their doorways and driveways. Not defiant, not angry, just present, bearing witness to his own humiliation with the same quiet dignity he'd maintained throughout Mark's verbal assault. Mrs. Chun from the corner house had her hand over her mouth. The young couple on their porch looked uncomfortable, whispering to each other. The Henderson twins had stopped recording and were just staring, their expressions troubled. "Wagner," Chin called out, his radio still pressed his ear. "You need to hear this." She ignored him, still copying the VIN, double-checking each digit. Everything had to be perfect. Everything had to be documented correctly because this was going to be her first major arrest, her first real validation that she belonged in this uniform. Officer Wagner. Chen's voice carried urgency now. "Stop what you're doing and listen to me." Mark sensed a shift in Chen's tone and didn't like it. What is it? Did you find something? Is there a warrant? Is he?" The unmarked SUV's door opened, and Sergeant Peter Perkins stepped out. He was 53 years old, 28 years on the force, and he'd been at home watching a baseball game when the dispatch call came through. Suspicious person, possible vehicle theft, Briarwood Estates. The address had caught his attention because he knew that neighborhood. High-end, low crime, the kind of place where a suspicious person usually meant someone who doesn't look like they belong. He'd hoped he was wrong. He'd hoped this was legitimate. He'd hoped he wouldn't arrive to find exactly what he was now seeing. A black man in business attire spread eagle against an expensive vehicle, while a rookie officer treated him like a carjacker, and a white man in a polo shirt shouted encouragement from the sidelines. Perkins took 3 steps toward the scene and stopped. His face went from alert to frozen, color draining from his cheeks as recognition hit him like a physical blow. "Oh, God," he whispered. Then louder, urgent, almost panicked. "Wagner!" Step away from him. Step away right now. Wagner's head snapped up, confusion breaking through her by-the-book concentration. "Sergeant, I've got this under control. Suspect is compliant. I'm just verifying." I said step away. Perkins was moving now, crossing the distance between his SUV and the Tesla with long, urgent strides that made several neighbors take involuntary steps backward. His face had gone from its usual healthy tan to something approaching ash. His hands were raised, not in threat, but in something close to supplication, as if he were approaching a bomb that might detonate at any moment. Mark stepped forward, blocking Perkins' path with the confidence of someone who believed authority would naturally align with him. "Sergeant, thank God you're here. This man showed up in a stolen vehicle, and—" Perkins didn't slow down. He moved past Mark as if he were furniture, didn't acknowledge him, didn't even glance in his direction. The dismissal was so complete, so absolute, that Mark actually stumbled, his sentence dying mid-word. "Sergeant." Mark tried again, his voice climbing toward confusion. "Did you hear what I—" "Shut up." Perkins said flatly, still moving, still focused entirely on the man spread against the Tesla's hood. Two words that landed like a slap, delivered without heat or emotion, just a simple command that left no room for negotiation. Wagner had frozen, her notepad still in hand, the VIN only half copied. She'd never heard Sergeant Perkins speak to a civilian that way, never seen him move with this kind of barely controlled urgency. "Sir, what's wrong?" "What?" "Step away from him." Perkins reached him now, positioning himself between Wagner and Johnny. His hand went to Johnny's shoulder, gentle, almost reverent. "Mr. Bowen." "Sir, I am so deeply sorry." "You can stand up. Please stand up." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "Mr. Bowen." "Sir." Wagner's brain struggled to process the shift. Suspects didn't get called sir in that tone. Suspects didn't get apologies. Suspects didn't get handled like they were made of something precious and fragile that had been damaged and needed to be carefully restored. Johnny straightened slowly, his hands leaving the Tesla's hood, his posture returning to that perfect verticality he'd maintained before Wagner had forced him into submission. His expression hadn't changed. Calm, composed, unsurprised, because Johnny had known the moment Perkins' SUV turned onto Briarwood Lane exactly how this would unfold, had been waiting for this precise moment when the power dynamic would shift so completely that everyone watching would feel the ground disappear beneath their feet. "Sergeant Perkins," Johnny said quietly, his voice carrying despite its softness. Officer Wagner was following protocol. No apology necessary. It was grace offered to someone who hadn't earned it, and that somehow made it worse. Made Wagner realize that whatever was happening here, whoever this man was, he operated on a level so far above her understanding that her entire assessment had been not just wrong but catastrophically, career-endingly wrong. "Protocol," Perkins repeated, and the word came out bitter. He turned to Wagner, and she actually flinched at the expression on his face. "Do you know who this is? Do you have any idea who you just had spread eagle against his own vehicle in his own driveway?" Wagner's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Mark, still standing where Perkins had dismissed him, found his voice. "That's what I've been trying to tell you. He doesn't live here. He doesn't belong in this neighborhood. That car is—" "His car," Perkins interrupted, his voice hard as concrete. "His driveway, his house. And if you say one more word, Mr. Mercer, I will arrest you for filing a false police report and interfere with an officer's duties." The color that had drained from Perkins' face earlier now drained from Mark's. "False report? But I saw him, I thought." "You saw a black man," Perkins said flatly. "That's all you saw. That's all you needed to see to call 911 and claim he was a criminal." Rick and Antoinette had started backing away, creating distance between themselves and Mark, their earlier solidarity evaporating as they sensed the magnitude of the mistake they participated in. Chun was standing off to the side, his radio silent now, his expression a mixture of relief that he tried to stop this and horror that it had gotten this far. Wagner finally found words. "Sir, who is he?" Perkins looked at Johnny, silent permission to decide how much to reveal, how much to make him understand. Johnny adjusted his tie, brushed an invisible piece of lint from his gray suit sleeve, and smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was a smile of someone who just watched their opponents checkmate themselves. Perkins couldn't stop apologizing. The words tumbled out of him like he was trying to build a wall, between what had just happened and what could still be salvaged. "Mr. Bowen, I cannot express how deeply sorry I am. This should never have happened. This is unacceptable. Completely unacceptable. I don't know what to—" "Sergeant Perkins," Johnny interrupted gently, his voice carrying the kind of authority that didn't need volume. "Take a breath." Perkins stopped mid-sentence, actually followed the instruction, his chest rising and falling in an exaggerated inhale that looked almost comical if the situation weren't so devastating. Mark Mercer, standing forgotten at the edge of the scene, his earlier confidence now curdling into defensive confusion, couldn't stay silent. Something about Perkins' deference, about the way everyone's attention had shifted away from vindication and toward something that felt uncomfortably like reverence, triggered his need to reassert control. "Wait, what?" Mark's voice cracked slightly. "Wait, he stole that car. I saw him pull up. I've lived here for 6 years, and I've never seen him before in my life. He doesn't—" "Mr. Mercer." Perkins turned, and the look on his face made Mark take an involuntary step backward. "Shut your mouth. Right now." The cul-de-sac had gone silent. Even the afternoon breeze seemed to have stopped, leaving only the quiet hum of the Tesla's battery and the distant sound of someone's sprinkler system 3 houses over. "Buddy?" Mark tried again, his voice smaller now, uncertainty bleeding through. "This is your neighbor," Perkins said, each word landing like a gavel strike. "This is John Michael Bowen. He purchased the property at 847 Briarwood Lane 37 days ago. Paid cash, above asking price. That Tesla Model X." He gestured toward the vehicle Wagner had been treating as stolen property. "Registered in his name. Clean title. Purchased new last year from the Tesla dealership on Morrison Boulevard." Mark's face cycled through confusion to understanding to something approaching horror. "But I didn't know. Nobody told me there was." "There was what?" Johnny spoke for the second time since Perkins had arrived, and everyone turned toward him as if he'd just appeared from thin air. "A new resident? A new neighbor? Someone you should have introduced yourself to like a decent human being instead of blocking their driveway and screaming about theft." Mark opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I thought I was protecting the neighborhood. He's also," Perkins continued, his voice cutting through Mark's stammering, "the chief legal counsel for the police union, the head of the police oversight committee, the attorney who represents our pension fund and negotiated our last 3 contract renewals with the city." Wagner made a small sound that might have been a whimper. Her notepad slipped from her fingers and clattered against the driveway. Chittick closed his eyes and was shaking his head slowly, as if watching a car accident in slow motion that he'd seen coming but couldn't prevent. The neighbors who'd been recording, who'd been watching with varying degrees of approval or discomfort, suddenly found themselves looking at their phones as if they'd just discovered they'd been filming something that would require immediate deletion. Several had already started backing toward their homes. "The man," Perkins continued relentlessly, "who sits on a review board that evaluates officer conduct and determines disciplinary action. The man who has the mayor's personal cell phone number and has lunch with the police chief once a month to discuss department policy." Each sentence landed like a physical blow. Mark had gone gray, the implications cascading through his mind faster than he could process them. "So when you called 911, Perkins said, his voice dropping to something quiet and dangerous, and reported a suspicious blackmail with a stolen vehicle, What you actually did was summon police to harass the one man in this city who has the authority to end careers, revoke pensions, and initiate federal investigations into departmental practices. Rick had disappeared entirely. Just gone, evaporated back into his house like smoke. Antoinette stood frozen on the sidewalk, her face a mask of social calculation, trying desperately to figure out how to distance herself from Mark without making it obvious she'd been complicit. "I didn't know," Mark whispered, and it sounded like a prayer. "How was I supposed to know?" Johnny's smile widened fractionally. "You could have asked. You could have said, 'Hello, I'm your neighbor. Welcome to Briarwood.' You could have done literally anything except assume criminality based on the color of my skin. But the car, it's so expensive, I thought. You thought a black man couldn't afford it." Johnny finished for him. "You thought success looked a certain way, and I didn't match your picture." The silence that followed was the kind that made people acutely aware of their own breathing. Mark stood in the middle of his own destruction, looking for an exit that didn't exist, for words that might somehow rewind the last hour of his life. Johnny reached for his briefcase, still sitting on the Tesla's hood where Wagner had moved it during her search. His movements were unhurried, deliberate, the kind of calm that came from knowing the worst was yet to come and that he controlled its timing. He opened the case, extracted a single document, closed the case with a soft click that sounded like a judge's gavel in the suburban silence. "Mark Mercer," Johnny said, and something about the way he used a full name made it sound like a formal indictment. "Regional Manager for Apex Logistics, Warehouse Operations Division, employee number 47382, hired April 2018. Current salary," he glanced at the document, $127,000 annually plus performance bonuses. Mark's face transitioned from gray to a color that didn't have a name, somewhere between green and white. Why would you? "Correct," Johnny asked mildly, tilting his head as if this were a casual conversation over a backyard fence instead of an execution. Mark nodded. It was involuntary, reflexive, the response of a man whose brain had stopped processing information coherently and had defaulted to compliance. Johnny's smile could have frozen water. "Interesting. Small world, isn't it?" He held up the document so Mark could see the letterhead, Bowen and Associates, Legal Counsel, and below it in bold type, "Confidential, Internal Audit Protocol." "My firm," Johnny continued, his voice conversational, almost friendly, which somehow made it worse, "was retained by the Apex Logistics Board of Directors 3 weeks ago. Something about discrepancies in the warehouse division, missing inventory, unexplained expenses, the kind of financial irregularities that require thorough investigation." He paused, letting the implications settle like fallout. "I've been preparing for Monday's kickoff meeting, going through personnel files, organizational charts, employee records." Another pause. "Your name came up quite a bit in the preliminary documentation. Regional Manager, direct oversight of 4 distribution centers. Signature authority on purchase orders up to $500,000. Mark had stopped breathing. Just stopped, his chest frozen mid-inhale, his brain trying desperately to calculate whether this was coincidence or cosmic retribution. "So you see," Johnny said, "when you blocked my driveway this afternoon, when you grabbed your neighbors and formed your little barricade, when you called the police and reported a theft that never happened." His voice remained pleasant, almost warm. What you actually did was harass the lead investigator on the audit that would determine whether you keep your job, your reputation, and your freedom from federal prosecution. Perkins had taken several steps back, instinctively removing himself from the blast radius. Wagner looked like she might be sick. Chin had his hand over his face, caught between horror and the kind of dark professional appreciation for just how thoroughly Mark Mercer had destroyed himself. The audit begins Monday morning, Johnny continued. 9 a.m. sharp. Apex Logistics Headquarters, Executive Conference Room. I'll be presenting preliminary findings to the board, outlining our investigation scope, and identifying key personnel who will be subject to enhanced scrutiny. He looked directly at Mark, and his expression held no mercy. I'll be seeing you there, Mr. Mercer. We have a lot to discuss. Your expense reports from the last 18 months are particularly fascinating. So many restaurant charges, so many client entertainment, events, so many receipts that don't quite match up with the company calendar. Mark's mouth opened, but whatever sound he tried to make die before it reached his vocal cords. Of course, Johnny said, his tone shifting to something that might have been reasonable if it weren't so clearly predatory. The audit will be thorough and impartial. Every employee will be evaluated on their actual conduct, not on assumptions or prejudices. We'll examine the evidence carefully and draw conclusions based on facts. He paused, let that sink in. The same courtesy you didn't extend to me this afternoon. The briefcase clicked shut again. Johnny turned back to his Tesla, pressing the button that finally lowered the Falcon Wing doors with their distinctive mechanical whisper. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in the absolute silence of Briarwood Lane. Sergeant Perkins, Johnny said without turning around. I trust this matter is concluded. I have work to prepare for Monday's meeting. Yes, sir, Perkins said quickly. Completely concluded. Again, I apologize. No apology necessary, Johnny interrupted. Officer Wagner was following her training. Perhaps her training needs examination, but that's a conversation for the Oversight Committee, which meets Tuesday afternoon. I'll add it to the agenda. He opened the Tesla's driver door, paused, looked back at Mark one final time. Welcome to the neighborhood, Mr. Mercer. I look forward to being your neighbor for many years to come. The smile that accompanied those words was the coldest thing anyone on Briarwood Lane had ever seen. Assuming, of course, you can still afford to live here after Monday. The video went live at 4:17 p.m., 18 minutes after Johnny Bowen closed his front door and disappeared into the sanctuary of his home. The Henderson twins had been recording from their second-floor window, their angle capturing everything. Mark's pointing finger, Johnny's raised hands, Wagner's aggressive pat down, Perkins' panicked intervention, and most damning of all, the audio of Mark screaming he stole that car, followed by Perkins' response identifying Johnny as the chief legal counsel for the police union. They posted it to Twitter with a caption that was equal parts horror and fascination. My neighbor just called the cops on our other neighbor for stealing his own Tesla. He's a literal attorney who oversees the police. This is Briarwood Estates. This is real. Hashtag Briarwood Bigot. The internet found it within 40 minutes. By 5 p.m., it had 50,000 views. By 6 p.m., it had been retweeted by 3 local news accounts and a civil rights organization. By 7 p.m., hashtag Briarwood Bigot was trending in 17 states, and Mark Mercer's LinkedIn profile had been screenshot archived and dissected by thousands of people who now knew his employer, his job title, and his face. By 8 p.m., Apex Logistics' corporate communications team was in crisis mode. The company's Twitter mentions had exploded with angry customers demanding to know why they employed someone who racially profiles his own neighbors. The company's stock had dipped 2% in after-hours trading. The local news had sent camera crews to Briarwood Estates, though security wasn't letting them pass the gate. 3 board members had called the CEO's personal cell phone, and the CEO had called the head of PR, and the head of PR had called a crisis management firm they kept on retainer for exactly this kind of nightmare. Mark Mercer's phone had been ringing nonstop since 6:30 p.m. His wife, his mother, his boss, his boss's boss. Numbers he didn't recognize, but answered anyway, desperate for someone who wasn't calling to tell him his life was over. But it was over. He knew it with the same certainty he'd felt that afternoon when he'd been convinced Johnny Bowen was a criminal. Except this time, he was right. At 9:47 p.m., Apex Logistics posted a statement on their corporate Twitter account. It was brief, clinical, and devastating. Apex Logistics has become aware of a deeply disturbing incident involving one of our employees. The behavior displayed in the video circulating on social media does not reflect our company values or commitment to diversity and inclusion. Effective immediately, Mark Mercer is no longer employed by Apex Logistics. We are cooperating fully with all investigations and have reached out to Mr. Bowen to offer our sincere apologies. The statement was retweeted 40,000 times in the first hour. News outlets picked it up. Legal analysts appeared on cable news to discuss the implications. Employment lawyers wrote think pieces about social media accountability and corporate liability for employee misconduct off company property. Mark saw the statement at 10:03 p.m. He was sitting in his living room. His wife had taken their kids to her mother's house, and his phone was finally silent because everyone who needed to tell him something had already done so. The words on the screen didn't quite process at first. His brain had stopped accepting new information somewhere around the 7,000 comment calling for his termination. Effective immediately. No longer employed. 23 years with the company. Gone. Vested stock options. Gone. The retirement plan he'd been counting on. The health insurance his family depended on. The professional reputation he'd built across 2 decades. All of it erased in 6 hours because of 30 seconds of hate caught on video. His phone buzzed one more time. An email from his attorney. He'd retained one at 7:15 p.m., the first smart thing he'd done all day. The subject line read, Upcoming audit conflict of interest. Mark didn't open it. He knew what it would say. That Johnny Bowen would need to recuse himself from the Apex Logistics audit. That there was a conflict of interest now. That the investigation would be handed to another firm. Which meant Mark had destroyed his career for nothing. The one small mercy he'd been hoping for. That maybe, somehow, Johnny wouldn't be the one examining his expense reports, his purchasing decisions, his signatures on documents that probably shouldn't have been approved, was gone too. Because Johnny Bowen didn't need to conduct the audit anymore. Johnny Bowen had already won. The internet had done what the legal system would have taken months to accomplish. Mark Mercer had been tried, convicted, and sentenced by social media in less time than it took to watch a movie. At 11:34 p.m., a reporter from a local ABC affiliate knocked on Mark's door. He didn't answer. At midnight, someone threw eggs at his garage. At 1:17 a.m., His wife called to say she wasn't coming home, that the kids were asking questions she didn't know how to answer, that she needed time to think. Mark sat in his living room until dawn, watching his phone scroll through comments that called him racist, bigot, Karen, privilege, canceled. Watching his life become a cautionary tale, a meme, a moment of viral justice that would follow him forever. And across the cul-de-sac, in the house at 847 Briarwood Lane, Johnny Bowen slept peacefully. The fruit baskets started arriving on Saturday morning. Rick's came first, delivered at 7:43 a.m. by a service that specialized in gourmet apology arrangements. Organic pears, imported cheeses, a bottle of wine that probably cost more than Rick had ever spent on a neighbor in his life. The card read, "Deepest apologies for misunderstanding. Welcome to Briarwood. The Hendersons." Johnny saw it from his kitchen window, watched the delivery person set it on his porch, watched them ring the doorbell and wait, watched them eventually leave when no one answered. The basket sat there for 3 hours before Johnny finally brought it inside and set it, unopened, in his pantry next to the cleaning supplies. Antoinette's arrived at 2:15 p.m. Hers was larger, more expensive, trying harder. Chocolate-covered strawberries, champagne, a handwritten note on cream-colored stationery that went on for 3 paragraphs about regrettable assumptions and hoping to start fresh and building community together. Johnny didn't read past the first sentence. Her basket joined Rick's in the pantry, still wrapped in its cellophane prison. By Sunday, for more baskets had materialized. Mrs. Chen's included homemade cookies and a note in shaky handwriting apologizing for not speaking up. The young couple from down the street sent flowers with a card saying they'd been uncomfortable but didn't know what to do. Even the Hendersons' parents, who lived 3 states away and had seen the video, sent something, as a proximity by family association required atonement. Johnny accepted none of them as gestures of genuine remorse. They were social calculations, reputation management, the neighborhood's collective attempt to distance themselves from Mark Mercer's documented bigotry by performing belated decency. They were gifts given not because people felt sorry for what happened, but because they were terrified of being associated with it. The for sale sign went up at Mark's house on Monday morning at 8:47 a.m., 13 minutes before Johnny's audit meeting was scheduled to begin. Johnny saw it while backing the Tesla out of his garage, the white vehicle gleaming in the early sunlight, its falcon wing doors staying closed this time because there was no one left to perform for. The sign was discreet, expensive, from one of those real estate agencies that specialize in luxury properties and confidential sales. But everyone in Briarwood knew what it meant. Mark Mercer was fleeing. Not just the job he'd lost, but the zip code that had witnessed his destruction, the neighbors who had video evidence of his prejudice, the cul-de-sac where every driveway now represented a judgment he couldn't escape. Johnny didn't slow down as he passed, didn't look at the darkened windows of Mark's house, where the curtains stayed drawn all day, every day now. Didn't acknowledge the man he sometimes glimpsed through gaps in the blinds, a shadow moving through rooms that used to represent success and now represented failure. Rick had stopped making eye contact entirely. When Johnny collected his mail, Rick would suddenly remember urgent business inside his house. Antoinette had taken to leaving for a morning run 15 minutes earlier, timing it so she complete her route before Johnny left for work. The young couple waved sometimes, tentative and uncomfortable, as if checking whether Johnny had accepted their basket and absolved them of their silence. He never waved back, not out of cruelty, but out of honesty. They hadn't earned his forgiveness yet, And Johnny Bowen didn't believe in giving people credit for bare minimum decency, performed only after consequences became visible. Mrs. Chen was different. She'd knocked on his door Wednesday evening. No basket, no gift, just herself and an apology that started with, "I was wrong," instead of, "I'm sorry you felt." Johnny had invited her in, made tea, let her talk until she cried, and then assured her that being uncomfortable wasn't the same as being complicit, that freezing in the moment didn't make her a villain, just human. She was the only neighbor he'd spoken to since Friday afternoon. By the end of the second week, Briarwood Estates had settled into its new configuration. The cul-de-sac where everyone used to gather for summer block parties and holiday decorating competitions had gone quiet. People pulled into their garages and closed the doors quickly. The homeowners association meetings suddenly had scheduling conflicts. The neighborhood Facebook group, once active with requests for landscaper recommendations and complaints about the garbage collection schedule, went dormant. Mark's house sat empty, accumulating real estate showings but no offers. The price dropped once, then again. Word had gotten out, not through official channels, but through the kind of social media archaeology that happened when a property appeared on the market and someone decided to Google the address. "Isn't it the house from that video?" Potential buyers would ask their realtors. The racist neighbor who called the cops? And the showings would end early. 3 months after the afternoon that changed everything, Johnny Bowen pulled his white Tesla into his garage at 6:34 p.m. on a Friday evening. The falcon wing doors rose and fell with their mechanical whisper. The garage door descended with a quiet hum. And finally, for the first time since moving to Briarwood Estates, Johnny Bowen closed the door on the noise. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned to Echoverse as we bring you more incredible stories. Kindly ensure to like and subscribe if you haven't.